GM, welcome to the GM podcast. And today we have a really interesting topic. We're going to talk about Iran and Web3, and I just want to dive right into it. But let's first introduce two really awesome friends. Maybe Fatemeh, do you want to introduce yourself first?
Hi everyone. Hi Griff, Shayan. I'm Fatemeh, crypto lawyer in the space for I think more than 5 years now. I advise projects. I'm qualified in Switzerland. Big disclaimer before we start the conversation, nothing I say is legal advice, and especially because we're going to talk a lot about other jurisdictions than Switzerland, and I'm not qualified there. I used to work in criminal defense, white collar crimes, and sanctions before I got into crypto, and I'm also Iranian.
Nice. Cheyenne?
Yeah, sure. GM, everyone. I'm Shayan. I'm more on the technical person. Like I work on the Bitcoin ATMs back in the day, more on the consensus diligence, smart contract auditing, security, all these kind of things. My passion is more create a parallel universe that we all can use. And I started like a lot of like the translation to Farsi or helping a lot of like Iranian grants or Iranian people to get into this space. Since 2014, we had founding a podcast, some other websites around this, and happy that there are a lot more people involved in this space right now, and we can have a really constructive conversations about this. So happy to be here.
Yeah, and I think at least for me as an American, I'll just be honest, I really didn't know much about Iran until I started hanging out with Iranian people and learning about the culture. And there's really a rich history of Iran. And maybe we can start with that just for context about what we're going to talk about. Can you do like a 5-minute story? Yeah.
Yeah, I can try. So like, first of all, Iran is different than Iraq, is different than Italy. There's all of these, and it's Iran, it's not Iran. One of the I'll go for some key points. Like Iran has more than 10,000 years of history of modern civilization, and it's actually one of the first places that the complex urban centers start growing. And one of the things you may know is like there has been more than 2,500 years of modern civilization, kingdom history, actual kingdoms going to it. And Iran has been like a wealthy nation. People usually forget that because of like the state now and how the media shows. But like one of the facts that I find really interesting is right now women account for 70% of university graduates from science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, which is way more than US and most of the Western countries. And if you want to like move toward, like, I'm not like a history person. I wish my dad could be here. He would explain to you like from the day one. But a lot of people think the US-Iran conflict started after Iran's revolution. It's not true. Actually, this is one of the books.
When was Iran's revolution?
1979. Like 40 years. But this is one of the books. It's called America and Iran: History 1720 to the Present. I really suggest this. There's audiobook too, which goes through like how everything started and how it's been a back and forth kind of tennis match for the last 3 centuries. Coming down to like what a lot of these conflicts are, like 1953 has been one of the US-aided coups in Iran that removed Mossadegh, which was trying to nationalize oil, a lot of like things for the people of Iran. And it's interesting because that's one of the first times that the US was able to like overthrow a foreign government through sabotage and through like a lot of like soft war in that case.
Yeah, I've heard that because the CIA and MI6 were very involved in this coup to overthrow Mossadegh, right? And I've actually heard that the CIA used this success, as they said,
case study,
and then used it as an excuse almost to justify the likely success of overthrowing other governments with similar means. That this was one of the first times the CIA got involved.
On that point, for the listeners, there's a really cool movie that I think came out a few years ago based on all of the like classified documents that were made available recently. It's called Coup 53. and it like goes over this entire story and how basically the behind the scenes of what happened.
So interesting.
Yeah. And talking about movies, there's also another documentary on HBO called Hostages, which the initial idea is about talking the U.S. embassy hostages after Iran's revolution, but it goes through a lot more history. As first of all, it was really interesting for me learning that the whole thing was a bunch of students were like, we need to get our points across the world, so let's do this so we can use the media attention to like talk. And then the movement kind of got out of control, and the government got involved, and a lot of things got involved, and it ended up being the reason the US and Iran stopped talking and about sanctions. So it's huge to look at that, especially like coming down to like what we do in the space as like, we want to build this cool thing, and then it might get out of control. So let's make sure like the values are involved.
Wait, let's back up. So in 1953, Mossadegh, who was an actually elected democratic leader who wanted to nationalize oil, was overthrown, right? Yeah. And then was he replaced? Like, because it's still the People's Republic of
Islam. No, it was the kingdom back then, 1953.
It was the kingdom.
Yeah.
Okay, it was a kingdom, but it had a president?
Yeah. Okay. It had a prime minister.
Prime minister.
Yeah.
And then he was overthrown, and someone else came into power.
Yeah, so they put that goes to the history part that I'm not confident to like be able to give the names, but I was mostly talking about after revolution, the U.S. embassy hostage taking, that Argo, the movie Argo, was made as a Hollywood version of that, but there is a historical version which goes through like a lot of reasons why that happened. And as we were saying, like still a lot of like intelligence, like the three what do you call it? Like the NSA and others, not NSA, CIA was involved in that process. They want to like overthrow the government some other way. The sandstorm happened. It's a fascinating story. It's almost a movie-like thing. And to your point, even after revolution, which now is Iran, like Islamic Republic, we have a supreme leader there, an almost decorative president, and there's so many like connections there that I mean, we can talk about hours for that, but not the point here.
There seems to be like behind the scenes kind of a battle. Like the Iranian government like has clearly pointed out that the U.S. and Western nations interfere with their affairs a lot. And so they really hate Western nations legitimately and play that out. And then why are there sanctions? Like why does Iran, like why does the US like, you know, sanction Iran? Like where does that come from?
I can say something and then pass it to Fatemeh just for a second, because like overall, a lot of questions comes down to like why sanctions, as like sanctions, do they work? But then the hostage taking had a lot to do with that, a lot of relations regarding what they want in the world and versus that. But one point before getting into that is more abstract, is like when I was mid-20s, I read 1984 George Orwell, and I was like, this is supposed to be a sci-fi, but it's almost a how-to guide, like self-help book for governments. And it's like, oh, they just followed this, and you need that enemy to control the people. So a lot of hatred to Western is not necessarily actual, like based on real things, just the control mechanism of like a population. Now I'll pass it to Fatemeh for more factual statements.
Yeah, so the question was about sanctions and why. So Iran and the US don't have diplomatic relations for a long time, I think since the hostage taking.
And that was in 1979.
79 was the revolution. Shayan, do you have the date of the hostage situation? It was like shortly after.
Yeah, it was like the same 1979.
79 as well.
In November, yeah.
Yes, and the Iranian Revolution, which was supposed to basically move from a monarchy to maybe a democratic state, ended up like shifting towards this Islamic Republic. And this is not necessarily what the revolutionaries wanted, and there was a lot of different interests at play. but somehow it got co-opted or turned into this Islamic regime that has been having an extremely bad track record on human rights for the past 40 years. So they've been people there have been suffering more and more of human rights abuses by the government, and the sanctions that were put by first the US and then other countries followed on Iran were basically generalized sanctions. So it wasn't against like one specific person or one specific entity that was deemed to be the oppressor, for instance, or the bad person in that story, but against the whole Iran as a country, as a market, as a population. And the narrative usually put forward of why would a country put another one under sanction is basically because that government, that other country is somehow deemed bad, and the sanctions will help that government, like to change that government somehow, or like free the people, or quote unquote, for those who are just listening. and this is I think the standard narrative of why sanctions are put on a country. But this narrative, I think, has yet to be proven. So there is no evidence whatsoever that this is a strategy that works in terms of just going against oppression.
Interesting. That's so interesting. So it's like human rights abuses and hostage taking basically put Iran on the Western nations' bad side as well. And so there's this like clear, distrust and I would almost argue hatred, it sounds like, between the two governments at least. But okay, so let's fast forward to today. There is crazy things happening in Iran right now, lots of them. So what's going on? There's all these protests, and how did this all start? Does anyone want to jump in and tell us what's going on?
Yeah, I can. So as we said, like past 40 years, people were unhappy with the situation, and they were more or less unhappy depending on the time, and on like there was a war with Iraq, for instance, that kept them somehow busy. But it's true that people have been going to the street and protesting against the regime or against the human rights abuses. But every time they would go, they would face very violent oppression, and they would the protests will die very, very quickly. And now since September, and the very unfortunate horrible event of the killing of this woman called Mahsa Amini, who now became the symbol of the movement called Women, Life, Freedom, and the protests going on in Iran. So she was killed by the morality police because they just disliked the way she was dressed. And for those who don't know, in Iran, you have strict rules of how you have to dress. So women have to cover their bodies, their hair, and depending on how sensitive the morality police gets, and this is like, it changes and it's by waves, but sometimes like they would even bother women who have like nail polish, like I do, for instance, or like something like, or like a heavy makeup, or sometimes they won't bother. And this is like one of the rules, and there are many other rules directing everyday life of Iranian people. Like alcohol is forbidden. Again, like there's what's forbidden on paper and how it's enforced, and there may be a gap between those. But like partying is forbidden, like having relationships. Partying, yes.
You can't have a party.
So, I mean, so basically, like, if there's a party where everyone is covered the way they should be, and there is no consumption of drugs or alcohol, and there is no music on which people dance, because dancing and singing is also forbidden in mixed gatherings. So mixed genders.
What do you mean? So you can't dance? Like, I know in India and other places, it's very common that men dance with men and women dance with women. But even just at a mixed event, you can't dance?
So at mixed events, women shouldn't dance. No.
Really?
And again, like it depends. So there are a lot of parties in Iran. There is a really cool underground scene too. There are raves in nature. Like there's a lot of, everything is happening there, and a lot of cool things are happening as well. But on paper, these things are forbidden, and parties get busted also often.
But by the morality police. So there's like, can you tell us? This is really interesting to me. Morality police. Is this like traffic cops, but for morals? Like that's what it sounds like the way you're describing it right now. Like
Exactly.
How do they interact? How do they interact with society?
So it depends. Morality police is something that again, like sometimes they exist, sometimes they don't. Sometimes it's normal police who does the same kind of job. So it also varies depending on where you are in Iran. But in Tehran, oftentimes like you would see a van like in a big square or a street, and like with some and you know the fashion of the morality police, like wearing like and they have women polices there too with each other because men cannot touch women. So the woman police will arrest women, and then they will just point at anyone who they deem should get in the van. And then what happens next is also, it fluctuates. Like sometimes they would just give you a warning, make you sign a paper like where you say you won't repeat whatever you've done wrong. Depending on what is the reason. If they bust you at a party and you're drunk perhaps, or they caught you like dressed really improperly in party attire, maybe, I don't know, depending on their mood, they may just arrest you. Also they may give you like lashes for having this immoral behavior and so on. So it can get to very dark places pretty quickly. And that also, I mean, I think that actually it's really good that we talked about this, because imagine Iran's population is extremely young. So I don't have the stats here, but in terms of age, it's extremely young, and like young people who are, especially those who are connected, like Iranian people are extremely connected to the outside world, to the outside culture, to music, to and they wanna have, and I think this is just part of every human's like instinctive drive to just have fun, party, date, experience life. And when you cannot do it, or doing it goes with a lot of stress and danger, then obviously you want this to change.
Wow.
And when you want this to change, then I mean, there are events that trigger kind of mass movements. And since September, people have been protesting in the streets very heavily. And what is very interesting to me is that this movement is very special, because it's, first of all, a feminist movement, but it's a feminist movement that gathers like men and women, all kind of genders, all kind of orientations, all kind of ethnicities in Iran, languages, irrespective of like their political stance. They would all unite behind this slogan, and just right now, I think they call for the regime to basically go away.
And a heavy punishment. It sounds like there is a huge pushback against these protesters. Like, it's amazing that anyone's willing to get into the streets, given the circumstances. That, like, how do you want to describe how the Iranian government is like cracking down on the protests? And Shayan,
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, I'll talk a bit. Just one thing about the parties that, like Fatemeh was saying, because all those are illegal, the parties become an act of rebellion, right? The house parties. That's why it's fun, and also you feel that like you are actually doing this for your values a lot of times, and I really love those things. But also like stressful, as like so stressful to just party. But coming back to like more of like what's happening now. So these protests, as Fatemeh was saying, it's an ongoing thing for decades now. And we had one like in 1999, one of the big ones that started with students, another one in 2009 with called Green Movement, another one in 2018 for a lot of like economic reasons. And now it's becoming every like few months. And this the recent one, the recent one started in September, and it's ongoing. It's one of the ones that is, as Fatemeh was saying, so decentral, because like most of the ones before, there was like this goal that everyone like wanted that goal, and it was easy to shut down because you could just house arrest the leader or something around that. And now people just know what they don't want, and they're tired of like the oppression, which gets tricky. Like now we're seeing a lot of people getting into different campaigns, and they're starting to fight each other as like who the leader should be. And also it comes down with all the psyops. Like this is one of the things I'm kind of fascinated by, and also really confused as a person that has seen psyops in crypto for the last while. And these psyops are next level, as like how they get people to fight each other. One example that we surely talked about was the World Cup. So Iran has been big on soccer, and like we call it football there, but on like basically cheering for the team, supporting the team. The country kind of runs on like their World Cups. And right before the games, basically Iran's president did a whole photo ops with the team. And when the Iran team lost, people actually start cheering and we're like so happy. And that goes like against anything that has seen in the last decades and like the whole Iran relation with their soccer team. But it shows how
that might be a historical first.
I don't know anything before
lots of people in a country are actually cheering when their team loses in the World Cup. Like that's wild. That's just absurd. Yeah. But I've also heard just like plainclothes officers kidnapping people in mass, like people being executed for being out there and protesting. Like it's not. I just, why do people even go into the streets? I mean, do they know that they're going? What's their thought process? Do they actually know? I mean, maybe you guys don't know because you're not really there, but like,
yeah, like, so I was there in like 1999 and 2009 and going to these street protests, and there is this sense of, first of all, there's something that I wish everyone would experience once as a street protest, because there's something there that is beyond the things we know. Like the fact that with one eye contact, you trust your life and you trust that person forever. And then that is something that I've never experienced before or after those street protests. And even now is, you want change. Like how else if you can just sit on your ass and like want change, right? And as you said, there's like 15,000 people were arrested in the first rounds, and a lot of people got killed in the street just by the plainclothes cops just shooting around. It's insane, and people are really brave to go out. And we were saying like there are real kidnappers kidnapping people, and cops think they are like themselves. It's just insane. It's just chaos. Let Fatemeh add anything to that.
I mean, why people go in the streets is obviously because they have no other choice. I mean, I feel like if you know that if you go protest, or even if you don't have to go to the street to face a danger, like if you are a personality, an influencer, you protest online, if you create an artwork or a song that like a protestative song that goes viral, then you're also in danger of being arrested. As we saw, like there are a lot of artists that are right now in jail, that are tortured heavily, that are at the risk of being executed. So yes, you go to the street, you say bye to everyone, you think you may not go back, but you also, I feel, and that's why internet and social media has a very important role. And it's so beautiful to see people before going to protest, they would post a story, for instance, on Instagram and explaining why they're doing this, or we may not come back, but we're doing that like for everyone's freedom. And we hope like people will keep on going to the streets. And so it's very bittersweet what's happening, because like we obviously want this to succeed, because we don't want people to be harmed or to be killed, or we want people to live free. But at the same time, that comes at a really high cost, and the cost is often borne by other people.
Yeah, I've heard that they use non-lethal weapons, right? Like little balls that they shoot out a shotgun, but they don't go too deep, and then they will end up getting wounded. But if they go to the hospital, they're going to be arrested. So they just don't get them healed, and then they actually die because of these wounds all the time. Or if a doctor or a nurse actually helps them and doesn't report them, then that doctor and nurse is risking their freedom, and they're likely to be arrested. And that I even heard, I mean, and you guys can validate, maybe these stories are wrong, but you probably heard them too. Like I heard there were police that watched another police officer get murdered, but they were more focused on getting recordings of who was doing it than actually trying to stop the murder. I mean, it's just like you mentioned the psyop. It really seems like they're just trying to capture how many people they can, that are against that are part of this movement, and more than anything else.
So there are now the armed forces, sorry, that are in the streets and targeting protesters are all wearing now this camera like device on their blouse to record people. I've heard recently that they are using now facial recognition technology that they acquired recently to also recognize protesters, but also recognize just normal people in the streets who are not wearing, for instance, their hijab the way they are supposed to, according to the law. And so surveillance is really big. This one story you mentioned, I've never heard it, but everything is likely. I feel in this current situation. What is interesting is that there is a huge underground network of support. So as you said, like maybe you cannot go to a hospital, but there always will be nurses or doctors that will do it like in their garage. So it doesn't sound like optimum, but it's still amazing that it's happening. And there are underground support networks for everything, and it's quite decentralized, and that's how they become very resilient.
And what's the story with the internet? Like sometimes it works well, sometimes it doesn't. VPNs. What's the story there?
Shayan, do you want to give a background on this?
Sure. So I feel like the best way to describe this is like a lot of people have heard of Great Firewall of China. And this is almost the same thing, but also includes sanctions too. So it's like double filtering. So internet went on a normal day as filtered both ways, and like a lot of things like Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Telegram, all of these are filtered from Iran's government. And outside, like anything hosted on Google Clouds is not like hosted and like accessible in Iran. Or SourceForge, PayPal, any banks, any Visa card, like they're not accessible from inside. So that's a normal day.
So you're saying double filtering because the Iranian government's filtering, but then everyone outside is also geo-blocking and saying you can't.
Geo-blocking, sanctioning. Like one of the things that happened to my parents, like a few years ago, my dad checked his bank account from his phone while traveling in Iran, and it took him 3 months back in Canada to be able to get his account back. Because if you have a hit from Iran IP address, you're out. And then on PayPal, I don't think even good luck to try to restore your account. But that's a normal day. And now with the whole internet shutdowns, is like there's a lot of like throttling and bringing down the speed. But they basically shut down internet because they don't want information flow. There is like in the last decade, there's work called national internet or intranet, which is like just inside Iran network. To be honest, they've done it. That's a technical perspective. They've done a great job as like being able to hold banks running while internet being shut down. But still, like there's a lot of connections outside. There's a lot of servers, like services that would go out, but they shut down internet, so they prevent information flow inside and outside. And it's been more often happening in regions like the controller, like when there is a region that there's like a lot of street protests, they basically shut down the whole internet there, even the phone access, so no one can call, no one can communicate, and that's the way to control the population. But the outside one is just not get information out, because if you can silence people, then no one would know what's happening there. But there's a lot of color to that. If Fatemeh, you wanna like?
Yeah. So the first time they did shut down the internet, I think was in 2019, and there were protests that became quite intense all of a sudden, and then for the first time ever, there was no internet. I think for around 2 weeks, and this was It was extremely long, and they used this opportunity to just kill a lot of people without any news going back and forth. So it was almost impossible to know what was happening in Iran. And at the same time, mobile networks were also down, or it was hard even within Iran to basically they did everything to prevent people from coordinating on the ground, and also from information to go in and out of Iran. And it was extremely successful from their perspective, but at the same time they realized there that a lot of the infrastructure within Iran is not resilient to the shutdown. So the banks like had problems operating, like websites, even Iranian official websites were not operating, and so on. And this kind of was used as a test to see, like, to identify like the flaws of their intranet and the firewall system. And they worked on it from then on until basically September, October, where the protests started again, and they started promoting heavily their intranet. So they clone basically every app that people are using. They make an Iranian version of it that is extremely transparent for them and like prone to surveillance. And they've been heavily using this surveillance too. So if like a protester would order food to an address, they will go to that address and arrest them, or like use like the Iranian version of Uber and so on. So it's extremely surveillance prone. Right now,
just as a side comment, do you know if they own those applications? Like, is the Iranian government actually not only surveilling but also making money off of this? Or
yes.
they are?
Yes, they are. So either they are like basically any industry, any company, corporation that becomes big in Iran somehow must will get public investment in it. So it's also a way for them to control it and get a piece of the pie and everything. So the government is extremely internet and like digitally savvy. So they have they have developed all of these apps that are actually very have great user experience and are made for people to use. So I like old people, everyone uses them like on a daily basis, and at the same time like so they do all of this development work, they do all the surveillance work, like they surveil like even like how hashtags are spread on like Twitter, on and like Instagram. They make graphs out of it, like they identify accounts. And what they have also that is quite interesting is their cyber army. So they have like a huge cyber army that will basically conduct targeted either psyops. So they would push some form of narrative or just push counterfactual like fake news, or just confuse people. They will target one specific account, for instance, and try to report them, or like make them banned, or just like any type of online warfare we could imagine is conducted by this by this cyber army, that they are extremely hard to identify. So it's very difficult. Like for some it is easy, but from some others it's difficult to identify whether this is part of the cyber army or this is a legit account of someone. And that's why they're so efficient in confusing people, and basically confusing people leads to demotivating them and basically demoralizing them, and them thinking that this movement is not going to succeed.
Yeah, you don't know who to trust, like who's telling, like even the people you trust, you don't know if they're saying the thing that in social media people are saying, like referring to them. And it's also interesting that like one of the, like I've been trying to find a lot of solutions, like a bit back, like just zooming out. One of the things on Iran and filtering that is interesting is like even a 4-year-old knows about VPNs. Like there is like kids that come and say like, oh, my VPN is connected to this, or like know how to like bypass these like filtering. And one of the things in there recently, like so far, usually like one VPN protocol would work. Like if the VPN provider gets like known enough, popular enough, they would get banned, but less known ones would usually work. This round is something fascinating is happening, is almost they're A/B testing different filtering methods, as in one day like you're on your like ADSL internet, VPN work. One day it only works on LTE. One day like things load, the other day they don't even work. And it's like every day things are different, so you can't really find a solution that would just make you connect you. So you always have to like try to find Another way, a lot of people use these free Chinese proxies, which by itself is also like a security issue, like looking at that. Also, you don't know who's behind it. But even those, like, it's fascinating to me that every day it's a different connection and a different way. And you have to see like what kind of...
I heard Starlinks were airdrops into Iran.
Yeah, so it was a big campaign around that when Elon Musk on Twitter talked about sending Starlinks. But interestingly, a lot of people also got scammed and installed malwares on their phones just because it's fascinating. This whole psyops got so my first company in Iran were like unofficial Apple support, so I'm still in touch with them, with the people that I worked with. And they're talking about people who come to their office and like be like, I installed this Starlink app, which was clearly a malware, but it doesn't work. And and they're like, no, it's not like that. It needs a device. It needs that. It doesn't work like that. And they call them like pro-government because they disagreed with them on this app. They're like, no, Elon Musk said it works on all the phones. And it's such a fascinating thing. And my friends were like so confused. I was like, how to explain this?
Yeah.
And even the Starlinks, I've seen videos. I haven't seen actual like data or people behind it or anything, which makes sense because as soon as they're known, they would be arrested.
But
Yeah.
it's true that like so internet is available now in Iran, but in certain hours and in certain regions, and it's like very low speed to avoid like basically people sending videos to social media, uploading videos and stuff. So they are still connected, but it's kind of unreliable. So if someone is like needs internet to work, or is running miners, or actually a lot of small businesses in Iran are operated via Instagram. So all of this like had to kind of stop or adapt. So that's very difficult. And Elon Musk right away at the beginning of the shutdowns mentioned that they applied to, so he lobbied for the sanctions against Iran to get basically lowered. Or against the Iranian people, and then applied to get an exemption in order to send Starlink and have them operational in Iran, which he claims he did. But again, there's like no data on this, and whatever, it's really hard. That whatever has no hard proof is like prone to easy like psyops, and as Shayan gave an example.
Yeah, but they did change the sanctions, right? Like there were some recent changes so whether Elon Musk had something to do with it or not, like at least the U.S. government is starting to come around to the idea that sanctioning the people so hard is actually helping the Iranian government, right?
Yeah, one of the things that happened, like I don't know where this movement is going and what's happening, but so far there are two outcomes. One is like there are around, let's say, 10% of people in Iran are walking around without the hijab, which for me that I haven't been back for a while, I can't even imagine.
And can you say what a hijab is? Just
hijab is mainly a scarf on your hair to cover your hair, like for women to cover their hair.
So you're not allowed to show your hair at all?
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of younger women use that as like fashion statement and like showing that, but also it is like if you're showing hair, that's illegal, and the morality police can also like arrest you. That's one of the outcomes. More on the social side. On the parts that I'm excited and I'm trying to push for it is more this new rules on the sanctions. So they removed the umbrella as like Irani sanction is like Iran government versus Iran people. And that is a big achievement, I would say. That like one of the things is, as you were mentioning, the US Treasury General D2 license and like the new rules are saying anything internet freedom or communication, anything for secure and private communication, education on digital like tools, they're all now legal and like they're okay for any US citizen to like communicate with the Iranian people, which is huge, like compared to like what was before. I think Fatemeh can talk about this a lot more, but like how this has not trickled down to like the legal teams and like projects. They have on some of like GitHub, Google, and some other services, but not necessarily things that on the Web3 side that we're going to get to.
Yeah. Well, maybe before we dive into that, like,
Yeah.
how are people in, like, let's just figure it out. Like, how are people in Iran actually using crypto? Is it popular there? I imagine that it's relatively useful.
Yes, it's quite popular actually. So amongst younger generations, especially because Iran is cut off from like the international financial system. Like it's cut off from SWIFT, for instance, and like you cannot really easily send money in and out of Iran, while like they basically do that through crypto, and it's fast, and it like basically offers all of the things they need to be able to be connected and make money also outside of Iran through like commerce or just get remittances in. And what is really interesting though is that I mean, they used to traditionally use Bitcoin, and there is like a Bitcoiner community in Iran. There is a very small, way smaller, but still like Ethereum community as well. But most of the people are using Tether and are using Tron, and that's what they are, like they know best, and that's where they are most comfortable, and also that's where I think they feel more aligned in some way.
Wow.
And that's quite surprising to me, and I'm like, Tron did more for banking the unbanked than any other chain, basically, in my experience.
Well, for sure. I mean, the fees on using Ethereum are definitely too high, and probably using Bitcoin as well for stable coins. So, I mean, it makes sense.
Yeah, but also wallets geo-block Iran, so that's like when you look at your wallet and you see zero balance, you're like, maybe this is not the chain for me. I'll go for this other chain, which is Tron.
So just for backstory, like MetaMask uses Infura for the RPC, which is like the nodes that you would connect to. And those nodes that you'd connect to, the Infura nodes that are running the Ethereum blockchain, would actually geo-block people in Iran. So if your IP address was from Iran, you'd open MetaMask. You could still open MetaMask, but you'd see zero Ether because you're not connected to the chain. And
which is scary. That is scary.
Very scary.
Yeah, and like to that point, a lot of like usage, there's like speculation and trading like all over the world, but a lot of people use crypto to hedge against like the hyperinflation, because inflation is like insane there. And as Fatemeh was saying, a lot of remittance, sending like money to their kids that are out there like studying, or the other way around also because of the dollar. One thing early on, like really early, like 2013, that I saw as a use case was basically people trying to preserve their personal wealth, especially like sex workers and others, because the government would seize everything they had. But Bitcoin on their phone could be just a text on their some paper, right? So that was really interesting to see as one of the visions of this whole crypto would like empower people, right? That was exactly to the point, and I love that to like just know about it.
Yeah, and the history of Iranians using crypto is also kind of tainted by a lot of like unfortunate events related to sanctions. So you mentioned like MetaMask and Infura. We can give examples of like decentralized like protocols, but their front end being geo-blocked for Iranians. But there's also a lot of Iranians who use centralized exchanges or had access to centralized exchanges back then when Iranians were not banned from it, and all of a sudden the exchange like freezes the account, and there is no recourse for them to get the money back. And they would lose like a lot of money and like years and years of work trading, and then have no recourse just because they're Iranian, because like these centralized exchanges kind of unilaterally decided to block at that very specific point without any heads up. And like this is like just like events on all levels that add up to make this space extremely hostile to actually a huge like segment of its market.
Oh man, that's so horrible. I can totally imagine that happening. And I wonder what the exchanges even do with that money. I bet they don't embezzle it, I bet. Like I bet it just sits there. They're literally just stealing from them and no one's benefiting. Right?
Yeah, but it's kind of very convenient, right? When like you block all of the accounts, and like when the crypto is at all-time high, and like you know, like it's still something on their books. And I think like the recent events also with FTX can prove that like maybe they are not putting this money for themselves, but they're going to trade with it. They're going to use it as liquidity. They're going to so it does benefit the exchange in the end.
Interesting. Man, it's horrible. That's so horrible. There's a lot of horrible things, unfortunately, it sounds like, with, you'd think that crypto is really such a powerful tool for the Iranian people, but it seems like every time we turn a corner, there's some kind of issue.
Sorry, Griff, if I can intervene here, I think the most horrible thing, all of these things happening is kind of fair enough. It happened all the time. It happens with Airbnb doesn't give access to Iranians. It happens on so many other levels. It's not kind of something new. What is really horrible, in my opinion, is the fact that what the crypto space sells as a narrative is something else. So and that's where it becomes scammy, right? Because it attracts people, telling them that this is permissionless, this is decentralized, you can have access to it. No one will prevent you. We want everyone to have access to it. And this is the selling points put forward by every single person who shields crypto, no matter if it's a centralized exchange, a decentralized protocol, everyone will put that narrative forward because it sells and gets adoption, or because it's the prevalent one, or it's the one that makes us looks better. And that's where, for me, it becomes extremely sad, because people buy into that narrative, and then they the reality hits, and they see that this is actually they basically have been abused in some way by this narrative. And I feel what would serve us best, us as the crypto space, it would be to have a more honest narrative and be no, some people are there to just make money. Some people are there to actually scam people. FTX and SBF is a good example also of the narrative put forward and the reality. And it's always this: when the narrative is too good, and good in the sense that it's for the good of all, then probably it can the reality can be way darker. While if the narrative is not it's actually, there's going to be bad activities in crypto, there's going to be good activities as well. There's going to be scamming, and there's going to be thief and money laundering, but there's going to be also other positive stuff. Then we can have a more realistic approach and also shield ourselves against these bad actors.
Yeah, I don't know. It's hard, right? Because hey, your job, hey, I work in crypto, and I use that narrative. I say this is the future. We can overthrow governments with this stuff, or underthrow. Even better, we can build systems better than governments. And I'll say that stuff all the time. And well, I like to think we're, at least at Give It, we're trying to live up to those ideals. But it is, how do you sell that honest narrative? I don't know. That seems like an impossible task. I guess you always give people warnings, and you just, within your friend groups and social networks, you try to, especially if they're in Iran or a country like this, you gotta be really careful. What's your advice for Web3 people like myself?
This is a narrative that I align with as well, right? I like crypto because of these promises, and I see this potential. But I also think that this potential can only manifest if generally you have a more realistic approach. So obviously, if that's what you're working on, Griff, this is what you should put forward, but with the caveat that this is not the entire crypto space. It's not crypto, but it's your project. It's you specifically, right? And I feel that's where it becomes important to also call out projects who use this narrative, but at the same time, in practice, they don't enforce it. And we had many examples related to Iranians in crypto, where people put forward a certain narrative. And I don't know if Shayan, you want to name them later, but put forward a certain narrative and then acted in a totally opposing way. And I think we should call them out and make them align with their narrative. And it's also very, very difficult to call these people out, because they are basically the establishment in crypto, and going against the establishment, no matter if it's traditional establishment or in crypto, is extremely difficult. There's cancel culture also used against people who go against establishment. So this is a really tough battle, and I feel Iranians in the space, and especially Shayan, I want to name you here, have been leading that battle and doing a lot of good for the space, and we should just keep on doing it.
Yeah, thanks, Fatemeh. So back to the Web3 and sanctions that we mentioned. I just want to say that the reason I want to name a few of these that are the main topics. and also say the reason I'm mentioning them is that because the new rules, we need to revert back to the Web3 values and be inclusive and like reopen those cases that were closed once, like before these new changes. And as you were saying, the narrative really important. Like one of the, I think, projects if are that are transparent to the public, at least some other groups that don't have that limitations can jump in and address those limits and address those populations that were excluded from that service. And so, as Fatemeh was saying, there are a lot of like monetary related sanctions and users losing Iranian users losing access to their money. But there were like some cases like one of the projects I've been working on as a nonprofit is Women in Blockchain Farsi. We try to like mentor people to get through a whole development boot camps. It's been successful so far, like, till last year. It's been really good. But last year, we basically got like 65 Iranian and Afghan students into Consensus Academy. It was a 3 months long project. We did like every 2 weeks mentorship. And 2 weeks before the course ended, they all got an email and got kicked out of the course with no more communication. And I was part of Consensus back then also. And I was seeing this side poems about open finance and this side, how it behaved. And it actually made me like really question a lot of things. It's still like I'm going there, like trying to like find other ways, but that didn't happen. Like that, those people lost access to everything they had, and they couldn't finish the course. There was no monetary transaction. And
wow, so they had taken a course and they were some percentage of the way through, like
85%, yeah, 85%, 90% in.
And then they just like said no.
With one email, no more communication.
Wow. And no further responses about like
nothing.
Okay.
Yeah, nothing. There were like articles on TechCrunch about this, on CoinDesk about this, but no one really got back to that point, which is one of the points I really want to push for, like opening up. This is education. This is actually mentioned in the new rules that it is allowed to do. After that, we started this Women Blockchain Farsi, which are 7 Iranian women all over the world. They created this free Solidity course, and we put a grant on Gitcoin for this. A day after that Gitcoin grant got suspended, just because it was like a compensating the volunteers who indicates sending money to Iran, and there was no more communication on that. And I feel like another point now is the time to like talk about this. And also, I feel heartbroken because I did like a Gitcoin token audit with the team. Like there is I love Gitcoin, but that was kind of pushed back. MetaMask, you mentioned that, and geo-blocking is really tricky. Like, I don't think that we can address it here, but there is like ways to bypass it, as we all know, which is not a right way to talk about it, because crypto already has a bad UX. If you want to like block people to like go through that, it still gets harder. And another one that is borderline racist, it was like POAP. I love POAP from early on, but I wanted to like issue a POAP, a gratitude POAP for all the supporters of this podcast I had for a last while. And the podcast is, I'm doing podcasts from Canada on YouTube in Farsi. There is nothing in Iran in there. And I got basically rejected from creating that POAP due to sanctions. And I was not able to even like go to anyone else and ask for, hey, can I provide any documents to like make sure you feel okay with that? And the case was closed. And I feel like all those are things that like sanctions seep into like the whole Web3, non-financial Web3 in 2021, and we need to like revisit them again and open them up.
On the POAP thing, because I remember when that happened, and I remember what they're saying, and they were just saying like, well, look, Gitcoin did it. And if their lawyers don't think it's safe, then well, we shouldn't do it either. We need to be careful too. We don't have great lawyers. POAP doesn't have the kind of investment that Gitcoin has. So, they're just going to be like, well, we trust them, and Gitcoin's kind of like, well, we trust Consensus, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, Consensus is like, well, hey, we got the money and risk return, like. Who cares about 65?
Yeah. I hope they're not saying, "Oh, we trust J.P. Morgan," but like
they might be. Right?
But that's kind of the point that like we need to like. This is becoming over complex and like racism on the word that like we don't consider race, person, gender, anything as like matters on this interaction. Like we interact because we're humans. We're like want to do something great.
In some ways, it feels like government mandated racism, right? Like it feels like that, but I don't know, because they're like, hey, look, if you aren't careful, we'll throw you in jail, we'll fine you, we'll destroy your business. So you better be really careful. Oh, and we don't even know what the rules are. We're not gonna. It's just we might selectively enforce. Nike.
Yeah. I mean that I understand, like like it's government mandated sanctions, but then the racism is what comes, like it's not government mandated, but it's like how they basically enforce the sanctions or what they think sanctions are. So like there is like there obviously, like I'm all for compliance. Like I don't want anyone to run into any trouble, and hopefully like we have tools to avoid these troubles and to be like informed about the risks of whatever we're doing. But at the same time, like there is an approach to have, like if you want to exclude Iranians, or if you decide to exclude a language because you think that language means like being an Iranian living in Iran and under sanctions, then like you do whatever you want to do, but do it like in a respectful way to like the dignity of people you're targeting. And I feel like that's where we've been doing a very, very bad job of like knowing that these people are humans as well, and that like they will understand that you like want to like hedge your risk or mitigate your risk in that way, and this is not a battle you want to lead, and I don't think anyone will blame you for this, but like please do it like in a human and like caring way. I think that's like very important to remember. It's not because like we are all interacting through the internet, or like we're like hiding behind like softwares that we call infrastructure, that like it doesn't mean that we should also like have in mind that these are people and these are relationships we're talking about, and we should like give them enough care.
I think that's an important point. No, the racism is really over compliance, I think, is what you're going.
And also like I mean there is a fear-based approach that people are adopting because of sanctions has been used like by governments and by their enforcement as a low-hanging fruit to target on like either individual people, as we've seen in Ethereum, or just like software or smart contract, as in Tornado Cash. So they have been using sanctions quite heavily, and the results of it are also like pretty bad. Like you can go to jail, and obviously no one wants that, and we don't want that for anyone. But that doesn't mean that like, you have to be paralyzed kind of by this fear and do this thing that we call over compliance, or go like even steps further in case like to cover all of the grounds. Like what you should do, and I think everyone should do, is just to get very well informed about what are the extent of these sanctions, like how do they apply to you, and what you can do, what you cannot do, what are the risks of doing one specific thing, and then make an informed decision that is more targeted to like the exact scenarios that you're dealing with.
Yeah, I mean, to your point earlier, if you're going to go against the values that you are like exuding with your work, then like you better at least do some research around it. Don't just like be like, well, Farsi, that's what they speak in Iran, right? That's just no way, right? I can't touch that with a 30-foot pool. But hey, we're a permissionless protocol, and we're giving freedom to the world. I mean, what? Unless you speak Farsi, or we're afraid of something,
Mm-hmm.
But Shayan.
No, I just want to add one part to this part, that is, you have to like realize that even the enforcements are not rational. Like even with Tornado Cash, like first of all, being a smart contract, being part of sanction is just doesn't make any sense. But then also Tornado Cash had all the compliance tools around it. Like the main team created all that, and it still like went down as if it's an underground dark market for money laundering, which that should be a lesson to like, if you follow your values and like get it out there. And Tornado Cash still works. You are in sanctions, but it's still like running and it still works. And that's the promise of this whole Web3 and crypto, that like unstoppable brand, but like unstoppable tech, that it just works forever.
If I can bring a nuance here, is that like, so sanctions against Tornado Cash were imposed by U.S. government, right? And it's like within US jurisdiction. So actually it is like maybe illegal to use it in the US, probably it is, but it is not illegal to use it elsewhere. So like this is like a huge nuance. So because we're so US centric in this space, and like projects are also very US centric, we think that this is like a blanket ban, or and this is basically also what they want, right? That we think that, and that we think that all money out of it is tainted, so like if no one will accept it and so on, and like this is a ripple effect. But actually it's not illegal everywhere, and this is just one jurisdiction in the world, right? But because everything is so intertwined with the US market, with the dollar market, that it kind of, other entities decide to opt in into like enforcing these sanctions so they can have access to the US market. What I think is very interesting to me is that these blanket sanctions, so either Iran or North Korea, for instance, have been used to basically have or to target other things, like indirectly, right? Like target like privacy tech, for instance. Like, and while like the narrative for imposing these sanctions is something and extremely different, all of a sudden like we see it have an impact on privacy tech. We see it having an impact on people who decide to like do education in the space, right? Or to do like disobedience for educational purposes. And so like in some way it's interesting that sanctions do not serve the people under this oppressive government at all, and deserve them even more because they find themselves into like worst like economic financial hardship. But it does serve a lot the jurisdiction or the like global markets in some way, because like sanctions against Iran basically exclude, like global sanctions exclude Iran from the oil and gas market, for instance, or like make it way much more costly for people and the government to trade internationally or do import and export, or to be like put their resources on the market. And because of that, then other people will benefit from this. Like it's kind of like an like anti-competitive behavior, like excluding one big entity or like one big competitor from the overall market. Or and on that front, sanctions have been like very, very successful for those who benefit from this. And also it has been successful into targeting privacy tech, and people are more and more afraid of also building these techs or using them or just being in favor of them. And like we have to think that like how far can this go, right? Like it has been impacting and benefiting some in disfavor of others for so long. And like no one, I feel like, dares to have even the conversation around sanctions. Like I've been submitting like talk proposals and sanctions for a long time in conferences in crypto, and they've been refused. Like this is a topic that is
really
it has been avoided. Like it's like, I think it's like it's a taboo topic, or it's a topic people don't want to engage with. I can only assume the reasons, and I tried to have conversations around this, but like no one actually engaged with me on that conversation of why these talks were refused. But I feel like we should have this conversation. We should question actually the legitimacy of it altogether. The same way we should question the legitimacy of KYC procedures as a like effective way to tackle money laundering and terrorism financing.
Yeah, I remember your talk on sanctions was for DEF CON was rejected a day before Tornado Cash sanctions, and which was interesting. And that's kind of the point that it's kind of a weird thing to say, but I'm happy that the Tornado Cash case happened, because like a year ago when I was talking about sanctions and Iranian users, everyone were like telling me that you can't expect US companies to go against US sanctions. That's illegal. And when Tornado Cash happened, the conversation become like more real to most people that, wait a minute, it's so close to home. Like it's not that far.
It came after one of us, right?
Yeah.
They came after an open source developer who's now in jail, and other open source developers. I mean, you know how many people signed the Tornado Cash circuit? Man, I'm blanking on how to frame that, but you get so
ceremony,
many. Yes, the ceremony. Thank you. The trust that makes Tornado
Is it
Cash
like the trustless setup ceremony, something like that? Yeah, I don't remember. Yeah,
thank you. I should really know that. I hate blanking on these basic concepts, but the trustless setup, like I think it was something like 1,300 developers, many of my friends, and I'm sure all of them felt that arrest, you know?
Yeah,
They
and
don't feel it when an Iranian gets blocked from MetaMask.
yeah, and also like some, as Fatemeh was saying, that like the legitimacy of these, and also if they're in the benefit of the whole as a whole, like society, we can just see SBF, the whole 3 Arrow Capital, Luna, they're all like running free and tweeting and things. But this one open source developer guy, like Alex, was in jail, and we still don't know why exactly. There is no proper court around it. Like, so it's not fair. Like we should just consider that and see like why we're in this space. Why are we building this? We want to create a more fair world, hopefully. And also like scoping down to like what you can do is interesting. I remember at DEF CON, I think at Shelling Point, someone was asking me, what's your plan for overthrowing Iran's government? I'm like, it's not my job. Like, I'm not really trying to do that. If that happens, it's something else. But I can focus on this educational side, get this information to more people that they can change their lives, right?
Revolution is a tough thing to argue for. People get hurt, you know, like this is it's easier said than done. And I don't know. I feel like crypto will not fully succeed until borders are gone.
Exactly.
And that's for me, that's the metric. That's like the KPI. Like this is what success looks like. Borders are gone because we don't need governments anymore. But I don't think that's what everyone's goal is in crypto. I think a lot of people are in it just to make money.
Also, I had ups and downs. Like it's not necessarily we don't need governments, but we can complement the government to remove a lot of their control, the trust into government, into these protocols, and we don't need a bank to put our safeguard our gold and get the storage fees from us anymore. We can just use all these tech that we're advanced. We're much more advanced than when banks were created.
Well, you know, this was an incredible interview. But I want to give people some action steps because you know at this point we're getting kind of long. I want to give people some action steps how they can help. Like if this podcast really got into someone's head and they feel like they want to support this cause, what can they do?
We can also link back to GiveEt in this case. There are like some GiveEt grants that.
Okay, it's true. I put that on. I knew what you were going to say. I'm gonna give it chill.
Yeah. There are really cool ones. There is one GiveEt grant called Stand Up for Iranian, Stand Up for Web3 Inclusivity, which I really like. Their whole movement is create legal guidelines. Like the point about you were saying that POAP points at Gitcoin points at consensus. They're like, oh, we trust their legal team. It's like, I don't think that many legal team have focused on this issue to like create the guidelines, especially with the new rules. And that basic grant is trying to write up this guideline as a free open source tool, so every other project won't be lost and need to like invest in this. And the idea for that, like I've been in touch with them, is like more living document, open source, get approval of many of the crypto lawyers that are really interested, also aware of crypto tech. That's one of the ones that I'm hoping that to have some outcome out there. So if you're a legal scholar, please reach out to them. If you're like just want to help the cause, donate and get give backs. Also.
Yeah. Fatemeh, do you have any ideas on how people can support this issue?
I mean, so there are specific projects actually I mentioned. I had a Twitter thread on them listing like those I found on GiveEt. And I think there are more now since I can update the thread. But I would say this is like direct ways to help and could be interesting. But there are also just general ways to think of how we can make the crypto space more resilient to either like centralized form of attacks, or to also like basically offer this promise of crypto of having a permissionless kind of technology that serves good rather than bad. And this would be like through lobbying, doing research, learning about philosophy, legal philosophy in the space, questioning like why, like what we're doing, like the decisions we're making. And I feel like every decision that like a builder makes in the space like can have like dear consequence for the whole industry. So it can become like an industry standard. And I know there are projects actually right now working on standardizing, like for instance DAOs, or like standardizing some other things. And every time we think of standardizing something, we have to think that this may like just stay the way we designed it and not change. So make the right decisions, having in mind that maybe we want to compromise for just adoption right now, but like then we may just get stuck in it. And I feel we should also have a like broader perspective into different chains and how like other chains like deliver, and like whether we want to actually also get on the same plane or not. Maybe not actually, and that is totally fine.
Yeah, you mentioned something interesting that like when a lot of projects are designing or like implementing, they consider even nation state attacks or like these kind of things as security wise. What if we even start looking at them as like compliance attacks, as like, can your protocol survive a like legal attack in that sense, or a nation state attack through legal channels, which is a pretty cool, like that is something like we've seen with crypto wars in 90s, that you need to push any loophole you can use, any legal thing to get the point across. Like the fact that any like strong encryption were considered weapon, like now a lot of people probably don't know even about this, but please like research and it's fascinating to like just realize it's 20 years ago, 25 years ago. It's not insanely like in that much of an old history, right?
Yeah. And projects do a good job at getting legal advice early on, I feel. And there are a lot of like lawyers on Twitter as well. Like there's a lot of public information. Like we created guidelines also, like for project to structure the legal risk. I feel like please be conservative, because like we need you free and building, but at the same time like build things that are resilient. So like build something as conservative as you want, make it forkable. Like give the tools for others to do what you want to do or you cannot, or what like just for them to do better or different. And maybe like wherever they're based, this is actually very legal and has no problem whatsoever. And you can like also think a bit like more broadly in that sense.
Yeah, and in the defense of some of the projects that we mentioned, MetaMask, you can change your RPC. You don't have to use Ep4. You can add your own. But then, there is some work there, but at least it was designed to be redundant against this kind of censorship. Gitcoin is finally actually decentralizing their protocol so that the round groups can actually decide which projects are allowed to receive their matching funds. And this was I don't think that they can't censor the registry, right? So any project, whether you're speaking Farsi or not, you can actually register your project with Gitcoin's protocol. And and I'm sure POAP will eventually decentralize too, and make it very easy to launch these things. So I think there is or like Uniswap does geo blocking, but Uniswap.ninja or Uniswap. There's like so many forks of Uniswap that use the same protocols underneath, the same smart contracts, but just a different front end that doesn't care where your IP address is. So I think there is work there, but it can always be better, and especially when things become so public.
And also transparency to that point, like just be transparent with your users so they're not confused why this thing is not working, and they go to like your Uniswap example is good because it's also easy to fall for fake phishing Uniswap sites if you're looking for bypassing the sanctions. So at least have more clear guide. Like a lot of these educational things that I've been trying to do is more toward this. Like our first ever Shirachat episode is from 2016, and the title is "Stay Safe with Bitcoin." It's not like intro to Bitcoin. It's like stay safe with Bitcoin. And we talk about what this is and how the scams work, especially cloud mining was really a big thing back then. We're like saying, oh, it doesn't make any sense, even the financials. But yeah, just transparency. It's like the main points of this whole space.
Nice.
Not the main, but like a lot. Yeah.
Well, I think this was my favorite podcast so far. Sorry to podcast. This was amazing. I do want to end it with a shameless giveth plug here. If you want to help, there's just some amazing Iranian projects on Giveth, and or projects that are focused on helping the Iranian people. Shayan actually has a project he didn't even mention, Ethereum technology for Farsi speaking.
Yeah, this is the Shirya hat. This is the T-shirt.
Yeah, beautiful art. And maybe just really quickly, you can say where the funds go for this project.
So yeah, it's mostly like there is a lot of cost around like the Zoom account and the website, all other things that has been going on, but also we have designers, all volunteer based. We usually try to like for New Year's we gave them a gift, or like it's volunteer based, but we try to be using more of a gift economy style.
What is it for?
The technology grants is for the podcast called Shirya or Head or Tails that started in 2014, more all on tech. Even we were called like we're showing off our technical knowledge, even though it wasn't necessarily show off when you talk about DeFi like 2 years ago. It's kind of considered show off, but it's not necessarily now. That's the focus. Basically, the goal is to remove the language barrier for this tech, so people can learn about the tech, even write Solidity without necessarily knowing that much English, because that's a big barrier there. That's the main goal of it. All free, all nonprofit, and open source.
Oh, that's awesome. There's another one from I think Babak from Coin Iran Farsi.
Yeah,
that's focused on safe internet usage for Farsi speakers. That one looks super cool. All of these projects, by the way, have been verified by our verification team at Giveth, and made sure that the money is going to a good place. And when you donate, you actually get Give tokens back. So Shayan already mentioned Stand Up for Iranians and Stand Up for Web3 Inclusivity. Amazing project. We also talked about the free Solidity development course in Farsi. That was the Gitcoin project that actually got shut down. And then, when that happened, they created a project on Giveth, which is cool. And then actually, I really love this relocating Web3 Iranians project, which is really cool. It's actually successfully helped. There's a lot of developers in Web3 that live in Iran, and they just can't do their job without breaking the law. There's full stop. They are at threat by working in this space, by being in Iran for a variety of reasons, and especially just using VPNs or Starlink. And so many of them want to leave Iran, and this project has actually helped two different developers and one developer and his family and his wife and two kids to actually leave Iran and go to Turkey and start building a life there. Positive. Yeah. They were, this project was able to pay for flights to get them out. The sad thing is, relocating to Turkey is not easy. They actually have to go back because they only get 90 days in Turkey. They're trying to get residency, and they don't have many other options. So they actually, at least the two independent developers, have already had to go back just to conserve their 90 days. And then they'll have to go back to Turkey, and this project pays for the hotels and really just anything that it can do to support them. And it even has an application form. So if you know someone in Iran that works in Web3 and wants to leave Iran, check out that Relocating Web3 Iranians project and find this cool form. It's not like a Google form or a type form. It's actually encrypted, and even the project makers are anonymous. So it's a super cool project.
And that's a good example of. Sorry, jumped in. I just want to say that's a good example of like we are here to push for a change. Like we might not succeed to doing it at scale or like for all of the people, but every step, every initiative counts. Like because it gives also motivation to a lot of other people. Like the fact that they were able to come to Turkey for a short period. It's a life lesson of like immigration and a lot of things around there. So great job on that.
Yeah, who knows if they'll succeed, but at least they'll have a chance. And maybe they don't end up in Turkey. But I guarantee they won't end up in Iran in the long term. So that's unless, of course, there's some major change and maybe Web3 can bring that change. So, but thank you all for listening, and thank you, Fatemeh and Shayan, for coming.
Thank you, Griff.
Thank you.
This was fun.